I want to tell you a little bit about my study that I've been doing of the Bible. I am 73 years old, and I began my study when I was in college. I first went to college when I was about 18 years old, and I've been studying the Bible pretty much ever since then, a little more at certain times than others. For a while, I kept a letter to God. I realize now that was journaling, and that's a good idea for any Christian to take the time to journal and to keep track of what you're thinking about God, what you're deciding, what you're saying, and that way later on you can see what you said, maybe correct it, maybe affirm it. But there's been a lot of study over the years, and I just went through my file cabinet and I picked up this file. That's a pretty thick file. That's Genesis. Genesis 1 is a foundation for the rest of the Bible. It is an incredible chapter, and I hope you'll read it with great care. In Genesis 1, it talks about God's creation being good. God says, and it was good, and it was good. And when God gets around to creating a human being who was called Adam, which actually means a man, he calls him good. God doesn't say, oh, I made all this other great stuff. Too bad I have to make man. No, no, no. He said, it is good. Humanity is good. It's a fundamental goodness about creation in general. And I hope you see that. I hope you understand that. And he does say in Genesis 1, God says, let us make man in our image. Notice the us. There's more than one. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Usually we think about God the Father and God the Son here. And that's because in the Gospel of John, there is a brief discussion about how Jesus was involved in the creation act. And we've talked a little bit about that in the past. But again, the emphasis is that God saw this as good, people as good. And it also says, let us make man in our image, male and female. God makes male and female. And we can very easily say, well, of course, men and women, boys and girls. God makes male and female. But Don Joy, who is a Bible professor at Asbury Seminary, or I believe he's passed away now, but he said there's more to it than that. If you look deeply into the Hebrew, it says that he made people male and female. In other words, every single person is male and female. And you might say, how can that be? Because if you go back into those months before a person is born, and in those earliest months, there's actually part male and part female for every embryo. That's the baby long before it's born. So we are created male and female. And then with time, certain kinds of chemicals are released. And as a result, male or female predominates. Now, what controls those chemicals? It's controlled by genetics. And because we are genetically male or female from the very beginning, and that genetic component releases those chemicals. And I'm getting a whole lot more technical than what I should here. But the point is, we should never, ever demean male or female because we were all once male and female. We are one. And when men and women get married, it says the two become one. The two have been separated into male and female through that genetic process, and then through marriage they are reunited. Let us make man in our image. What does that mean? Well, it's our image. That's the way the Hebrew puts it. It's the relational aspects of the Trinity. Have you ever thought about the fact that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, the three persons of the Trinity, are in constant communication with each other? They enjoy being together, I'm sure, and they talk and communicate all the time. And so God makes us in his image. In other words, we are born, we are created to be related to each other, to talk to each other, to communicate. And we are also called, it says in Genesis 1, to rule over the animals in the earth. Now, that ruling does not mean exploiting. It doesn't mean killing for fun. It means we are ruling in terms of taking care. Some translations have it as caretakers. We are also to act in God's image. We are to be like God, caring for those things. We are also like God in that we are creative. What is the basic characteristic of God that is shown in Genesis 1? He's the creator, and we are made in his image, so we are born to be creative as well. The first thing you notice in the first two verses is that God creates. That's the beginning. That's the introduction to God. That's the introduction to the world. That's the introduction to everything in two verses. God created. And then see what it is that he created. He created light. He created the sky. He created the land and the seas. Do you see there's a pattern there? 1, 2, 3. And we ought to thank God for that 3. In other words, for the triad. There is a triad there. A triad is a group of 3. Light, verses 3 to 5. Sky, verses 6 to 8. And the land and seas, which is verses 9 through 13. Now, why is it significant that there are 3s? Because it's a reflection of the triune God. This is the Trinity, even in Genesis chapter 1. And that's followed very quickly by another triad. In verses 14 to 19, there's the sun, the moon, and the stars. That gives the seasons and the days and the years and the light and so on. The sun, the moon, and the stars. That in itself is a triad, but it's the first of a bigger triad. The second part of that triad is the water creatures and the birds. So you have a distinction here between those parts of nature, sun, moon, and stars, and then the water creatures and birds. The difference is that the second group is alive and thriving and doing things. And then there's a third part here, and that's the livestock, the animals, and the creeping things. Not creepy, but creeping. In other words, they crawl around on the ground. That's in verses 25 and 26. Now, there is sort of a second part to this third part of this triad, and that is with the livestock, animals, and creeping things. There's also humans, but they're kind of kept separate because we're not just animals. And then it all is crowned by the fact that God rests. There is completion. This is the completion of the first day. God rests. Did he literally rest? Of course not. He didn't need to rest. But it is giving us an example of how we should rest on that last day of the week. We need to rest, we need to worship, we need to take that special time apart.